Hello everyone and welcome to day 8. We're going to look at transformations, not much different than what we've looked at in the past few days, but just to recap here. So if we're given this function, and sometimes we can also write it as y equals a sine bx plus d without the c in there, and I'll show you why we're not really worried about the c right now. You can worry about that more later next year. But the a we know is the amplitude, or in the case of the unit circle, the radius of the circle. B is the frequency. Remember that frequency is the number of cycles in 2 pi. We also know that B is used to find period. And this is what's really important. Period. Let's try it. This is what's really important, period. Period equals 2 pi divided by b. We talked about that also. That's going to help you find the length of one cycle. C, we call the phase shift. That's whether it moves left that's right, or left. We're not going to talk about that a ton, but just so you guys know, if you ever see that, that's just shifted. The entire graph just shifted over left or right so many, whatever that would be, 2, pi over 2, whatever that is. And D is the midline. Y equals D. Also, we can call it is the vertical shift. So, for any function given, that is A, B, C, and D. That's important for how to graph these. You can pause it and read how to sketch a graph, but this is what we're going to look at here. We're going to identify the amplitude, period, and midline, and then we're going to accurately sketch the graph. I'm going to go over a few of these, and then we're going to do some more. You guys are going to do some more, and then we'll do some more in class and practice it. So 4 sine of 2x minus 2 over the interval of negative 2 pi to 2 pi. So just on this graph, we're going to actually figure out how to sketch it. So the amplitude. Amplitude is your A value. Amplitude is 4. No negatives, even if it was negative, amplitude is always positive. It's the radius. Your period. 2 pi divided by B, which is 2 pi divided by 2, which is pi. And your midline, which is D, y equals negative 2. So this is what we're going to do. We've got to figure out how high, how low the graph goes to figure out what our scale needs to be. So if our amplitude is 4 and our midline is negative 2, we know that the maximum is 4 minus 2, and we know our minimum is negative 2 minus 4, which is negative 6. And so, therefore, I'm going to make the scale here 2, 4, 6, negative 2, negative 4, negative 6. And to draw this, I always draw the midline in first. So if I know our midline is negative 2, I'm going to draw in the midline at negative 2. Nice and light. And that should actually be on negative 2. It should be there. And then I'm going to state our max is 2. And so we can also draw that we should never go above 2. And we should never go below negative 6. And then I'm going to look at the sine curve. And knowing that it's a sine curve, I'm going to start at the midline. So I'm going to start right there because I know that it goes through the quote origin, but the origin has been moved down negative 2. And so we're going to go through negative 2. And then I need to figure out where my main points are. If I know my period ends at pi, I know that I'm ending there and at 2 pi, at negative pi, and at negative 2 pi. One full cycle must have been completed from 0 to pi, because that's our period. And so now I've got to figure out, okay, well, where's halfway through 0 to pi? Well, that's pi over 2. And then I need to figure out my main points. Well, what's halfway in between 0 and pi over 2? Well, that's pi over 4. So I know that I'm going to go for a sine curve from our midline to our maximum, back to our midline, back to our minimum, and then back to the beginning. And that's one full cycle completed from 0 to pi. And now I'm going to continue that entire curve from negative 2 pi to 2 pi. And keep going. And this is probably the only poor part. It should be more rounded. Okay? And we're done. So just to recap, we put our midline in. We drew out our max and min so that we knew where to go. And then we figured out our period. And we figured out that one full period was from 0 to pi. I knew halfway through that was pi over 2, and then I knew the maximum and minimums were in between the midline, in between 0 and pi over 2. And so that's why we have to know how important it is to create a sine curve. Let's look at this one, and then you guys can try 3 on your own. So here, I want you to pause the video, and I want you to write down what the amplitude, period, and midline is. So pause it, please. You can also find the max and min from this, so pause it if you don't have what I have written down, and I'm going to continue here. So we have cosine curve. Cosine starts at the maximum if it's positive. So we know that the cosine, there's no phase shift, so we know the cosine is going to start here. In this case, the period is 4 pi, which means it was stretched. And so our main points are going to be at 0, pi, 2 pi, negative pi, and negative 2 pi. And so what we're looking here is from 0 to 2 pi, since the period is 4 pi, we're only looking at a half of curve. And so half of curve will be our main points. I guess I should say that. Our main points are 0, pi, and 2 pi. So at pi, we are at our midline. Should draw that in too. So our main points go from the maximum to our midline to our minimum. And if we go backwards, we know we're decreasing here. We got to be decreasing here at negative pi, midline, negative 2 pi, the minimum. Sorry, midline, minimum. And so what we're going to look at here is it should look like this. And there's our cosine curve. It was stretched. We know that a cosine curve usually looks like where our main points are pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. In this case, because we stretched it by a factor of 2, our points are now pi and 2 pi. I would like you guys to try 3 on your own, knowing that for 3, you should have a scale that looks like this. Pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. So that's going to take a minute. Pause it or do that later on. We're going to move on. Let's move to 6, and I would like you guys to take a minute and just to read this problem. So pause it and read it, please. And write down any information or underline any information that you think you need to know, and I will do the same. So 1, I knew the minimum, which was under the ground, was going to be negative 3. And I know our maximum, which is going to be able to be found, since we know it's 30 meters vertically from the top and bottom, that you can add 30 to give you 27. Now to find the midline, The midline I can find by taking the minimum, adding it to the maximum, and dividing by 2. It gives you the middle. It gives you the average, which gives you 24 over 2, which gives you 12. So that is our midline, y equals 12. And therefore, I can find the amplitude. The amplitude is the distance from the midline to the maximum. Well, 27 minus 12 equals 15. So that is our amplitude. So if we know our amplitude, we know our midline. The last thing that we need to know is our period. And our period is right here. It takes from the distance from the high and low. Okay, so if I just draw it over there, high to low is 50 meters. Now that's not a full period. That's the key here. The key is that you have to go back up. So our period equals 100 meters. And therefore, we now need to find b. 2 pi divided by b equals 100. If you put it over 1 and cross multiply, you get 2 pi equals 100b. And so b equals, if you divide by 100, pi over 50. And so now that I have the midline, the amplitude, and the period, I can actually write our function out. Y equals our amplitude, 15, sine. Well, we don't really know what it is, so let's actually go back and let's actually draw it so we know whether it's a sine or cosine curve. So we're going to make our life a little easier and say that we're starting at the midline. We're going to do it as a sine curve. So our midline, 12. So we're going to say 12 is right there. And our maximum, 27. And our minimum, -3. If we start at the midline, it's just going to make our life easier to draw. Up, down, to -3, and back up. Our main points being those. Now, we've got to figure that out. We know it takes 50 meters to go from our high to low point, right? So 50 meters from here to there. So we know it's 100. 100 divided by 4, because there's 4 main points, is 25. So we're going to go 25 meters, 50 meters, 75 meters, 100 meters. And so what we're going to state is 15 sine, because it's a sine curve, we're going to go up first, of b, pi over 50, t, plus the midline, 12. And note that I did make a mistake. It should be x right there, not t. And so there's our equation, 15 sine of pi over 50x plus 12, with the curve shown. What I would like you guys to do is try 7, and I'm going to come back after you pause it and try it with the answer for 7, and then we'll do the rest in class. But please try 7, see what you get. You're going to try to get the amplitude, period, and midline, and then draw it out, and then figure out what the cosine or sine curve looks like and the equation. Pause it. So to finish off these notes, I hope, and I really hope that you guys drew this function out to figure out that the period was 12. If you tried to do it in your head, you may not have gotten it right. I really hope that you drew it out, that you knew you started at the midline, that you went to the maximum 3 hours later, and therefore you know that it takes 3 hours to go back to the midline, 3 hours to go down to the minimum, and 3 hours to complete the one full cycle, so that the full period is 12. Questions on this, please make a note, and I will see you in class to finish these notes up. Enjoy your day.